Does her wearing the pants make for a successful relationship, really?
Personally, I prefer women who wear skirts.
How did I know you were going to say that, Joe?
I don't know.
I don't know, but I do want to talk about this today. So today we're talking about women wearing the pants in relationship and if it spells disaster or not. So when it comes to, kind of masculine energy women, by the way, I would put myself in that category where I'm a little more forward, I'm a little more aggressive or assertive. These conversations come up around if that can make for a successful relationship or not. And I know that I've had a lot of struggle in that realm with my personality, and I've had to find where I can balance it out a little better and not maybe be always trying to lead. Do you have any thoughts on, from a man's perspective, what it's like dating that like hyper independent woman and how to lead a leader?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because it might sound kind of out there, but what we're trying to do here is when we really get into it, it's going to be very practical, and that's why I think this is actually a very practical conversation. And the main experience I have with this, at least starting out, was my mother was very powerful, not in the normal terms in which a mother is powerful towards their son and daughter, in my case son, but she actually held very kind of high-ranking positions within corporate America. And so I grew up as she was in charge of her organizations that she worked for. She was highly educated, things like that. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple years ago. And then I had a sister, and then I had two stepsisters. So I was always around. And my stepmom, who was married to my dad, obviously she was head of an organization as well. So I was surrounded by women that had these power positions. So for me, it's a little more natural, I would say. But what I do notice is this, that I would say when I think about it, the recurring theme that I noticed that I kind of extracted when I was growing up was that although these women were very powerful in their corporate fields, they still wanted to be treated like a lady. And they still wanted to be respected. Now, they happen to be hetero, but they still wanted to be respected by the man and looked at as a woman. And I don't mean that a woman is not powerful, but I'm saying a little bit of chivalry, things of that nature, still went a long way with them.
Yeah, and there's like an ongoing joke that chivalry is dead and women killed it. And I might also add that men allowed that to happen. There is this back and forth where we're trying to go through this world right now where gender is an interesting conversation on its own, and we're not going to go too deep into that today, but just figuring out as a person, what do you want to feel like in relationship to whoever? And how does your needs, how are they met or not met if you are acting in a certain way? And that's kind of the journey I took with my really getting interested in the masculine feminine energy dynamic and where I could become more agile between the two, because we all have masculine and feminine energy inside of us, right? But it's a matter of when to use it, when it works best for us, because you're going to want to step into that more, I'll call it fluid, flow, chaotic, even feminine energy when you want to do something super creative. Like if you're going to make some art or you're going to write or something like that, you're going to definitely step into that space. But you still need that structure and that masculine energy to create the canvas in the first place so that you can do the art, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think that that this is worth noting that they're a woman who might be displaying masculine energy or more feminine energy, or a man that might be doing the same. And since most of the viewers here, I would say, are men at this point, that you have to understand that the woman in your relationship, her masculine feminine flow might vary depending on what she's working on or doing.
Or what time of the month it is.
Well, there's that.
Guys, if you're watching this is something that I wish all men would do, is really invest some time in understanding how the hormone cycle that a female goes through every month. Men go through their own, by the way, but it's not so obvious and it's not so consistent as far as month to month. It's more like every couple years, or sometimes it's every month, but it's a different thing entirely. But if you could invest some time in understanding how the menstrual cycle, get past it being whatever whatever our culture has said about it being taboo or gross or whatever, like, please stop. And invest some time in figuring out how to interact with women depending on what part of their cycle they're in. And women, if you're watching this, please invest some time in getting to know yourself in that way, because it is insane how you can change your world. I mean, I can literally go, I don't go on job interviews, but I could go on a casting, or I could go on, which is a job interview essentially. I could go do something where I need to really show up in an articulate way, like working, doing this show, for instance, like where I'm going to have to speak. And I'll know that there's certain times of the month where I'm going to show up way better at that job just because of where I'm at hormonally. I think knowing that when a woman's most receptive is when you want to get, close to her so that she will receive you, that's going to be during a certain time of the month. Like ovulation is about a 2-week period that, 2-week span that you can kind of guesstimate would be a good time to go approach a woman. Now, to know when a woman's ovulation is, that's a little tough. However, a lot of women ovulate at the same time of the month. So, I mean, we're getting into the deep.
Yeah, that's more, as a connectivity there.
Yeah, just research that, and you will find a lot of information that's going to help you with your game. I'll tell you that if you're.
Well, but as a segue with that to the thing is you, I guess the one of the points that I would like to make is that take the menstruation, the period each month. As a guy, you might see her acting a little strange to you or whatever. Maybe she's mad at you or whatever. But you got to remember that, she might just be dealing with some things and you just have to understand. You don't have to understand what's going on. Maybe, you should, but if you don't, it's totally fine. Just understand that there is something going on that's got nothing to do with you.
And I love that you said that, because I think there's this, I don't want to call it a misunderstanding, but it's a surface level understanding about what our hormones do and why that should be just excused. So if a woman, let's say, like, I'm PMSing, and you're like, wow, Mercedes is really having a rough time with, whatever we're working on, and this is becoming an issue, conflictual. She just seems to fight everything we're doing. Well, if you, checked in, or if I was in tuned enough with myself, I might say, hey, this is a time of month where I'm having a lot of my emotions ride very close to the surface. I call it the veil being thin, And when that happens, it's not that all the emotional shit that comes up, all my emotionality is for naught, or isn't important, or isn't worth talking about and working through. And that's important, because most people will say, well, I'll be fine in a week. You'll be different in a week, but those issues you're just stuffing down. They're still issues. So it's important to work through that stuff as it comes up, or to know that, okay, I'm glad all this, conflict or this issue is coming up now because the veil is thin. And in a week or 2 weeks, when I know you're in a more receptive place, let's set a time and a date to work through this stuff.
Yeah, and it also plays into this similar. It's biology versus what I'm about to say, but in a similar reactionary or adaptive guy technique is if you're your woman in the relationship, or you're trying to get in a relationship with a certain woman, or you're already in a relationship with a certain woman, is if they're in a position in their, usually it's a job where they're in a power position, you don't know unless you work with them, which you probably don't, you don't know what they're dealing with at work. I mean, how many times, as a guy, I know I've dealt with this a lot. I'm at my normal job or whatever my job is, and I'm dealing with I'm some higher rank, and I'm dealing with a project, and I get home, and, she's saying, I know that I'm sending this energy out that is a little, not, I don't want to say dismissive, but it could come across as that. And it's not her. And I know it's not her, but does she know it's not her? And so I think that's one of the added layers when you live with somebody or in a relationship with somebody that has a rank internal, with their business, either their business owner or whatever they are, very successful, what they do. There's a lot of pressure when you have a higher rank. There's a lot more pressure on you, and they might every time per month, it could also be something that's got nothing to do with you. And I guess the point is when this feminine masculine struggle is when you're as a guy, you're hypersensitive and I'm guilty of this, but when you're hypersensitive and you're hyper worried about how she's feeling and what she's doing, and you think of it as she didn't do anything wrong, and the waiter or whoever didn't do anything wrong. It's just you're dealing with so much emotional internal stuff through work or whatever that the outside view that other people see could come across as a little aggressive. And so I think that's, I guess, how we should kind of start out. Like lesson one is, it's probably not you, right? It's probably not you, the guy, when she's, because of whatever it is. It's like, don't worry about it.
I might take it even a few steps further, and it's not so much that it's not you, because we always have to figure out how to take responsibility for what we can or what's our side of the street without people-pleasing and transgressing our own needs and what we want.
Right.
So it's the step further is figuring out what she needs and what need is not being met. So it's not necessarily a need you have to meet. It might be a need she has to meet, but she may be completely choosing in that moment, subconsciously, to be still unconscious of what she needs. And we're gonna do an episode on needs and on figuring out our own and how to help our partners figure out theirs. So we'll get deeper into that when we do that episode. But I think it's really important to, in that situation, let's say you come home, your wife is getting aggravated by your high energy or whatever, maybe you feel depleted from the day or whatever the energy you bring, and it's creating conflict. In that moment, you're noticing a passive aggressiveness or some reactions happening. It's about like slowing down and saying like, okay, we're on the same team, and in this moment, we're both dealing with whatever we're dealing with. So how do I kind of ground this situation? And I think for men, I think they take for granted the hormones that run through their body actually allow them an easier access to that grounding most of the time. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're completely depleted from work and you're just exhausted, you probably should be like, figure out your nonviolent communication. Babe, I'm super tired from work. I don't want to take that out on you. Let me go, reset for an hour or whatever you got to do. Go lay down or whatever you're going to do. And then come back, when you feel good. So anyway, the point is that it's important to make that slowing down, that effort to slow down with what's actually happening, because we take it so personally, and like you're saying, Chap, there's almost always, there's nothing personal about it, and if there is something personal, then that's what needs to be communicated, and that's the hardest part, right, is like saying, I do have a problem, and we're gonna, start a whole aggressive conflicts.
Well, and
passively.
Yeah, and I think you said two really important things there that are very, very deployable. And one is, wouldn't it be amazing if imagine everybody at home, you're at work, maybe you're at work now, and this is on your lunch break or whatever. Don't work too hard because it's your lunch break. But you're watching this, and wouldn't it be amazing is today on your way home, instead of that, you're driving on the 5 or here you're on I-4, and instead of doing that, wouldn't it be amazing if you didn't have to drive that route, and because it's stressful and there's car accidents and people are being morons, but you drove, because when you get home, that's added stress and you're a little more annoyed, you're in that fight mode. And because when you're in that fight mode, it's hard to get away from that. It's hard to get away from that. And so you have to take that decompression. And naturally it's hard to decompress. I mean, you have to be good at it. Well, if that drive home was along the beach and there's birds chirping and there's, that would be amazing, or it's a country road or something like that. But you don't have that. We don't have that. But it's that's an interesting thing. You have to understand that on your way home, even though you left work and it was highly stressful, you're still in a stressful environment on the way home in this commute a lot of the time. So you got to try to start distressing before you get home, because if you're in that fight mode and you get home, you're not as willing to be on the team. And I love the team concept, and I've used that at times. Like, what can I do to fix this problem? And if it's as simple as just listening to you talk about the problem, and you don't really need me to fix it, and you're going to just fix it. For the longest time, I'd try to fix it. Oh, here's the problem. I was like, well, let me fix it. And it's like, but a lot of the time, you just don't need that.
And it just needs to be completely heard. And which there's a few things here that you touched on that I really want to discuss. The piece about having that nervous system regulation time and like really getting clear about what your nervous system is doing when it's it's active, like it's activated in a negative way, especially so that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. And that's what happens when we've been stressed, whether it's work or whatever. We're in that mode. And we're going to have a whole episode as well on nervous system regulation, so I won't go deeply into that, but it's a really important thing for people to just be thinking, like, what's my nervous system doing right now? I mean, like, in the good times, like right now as you're listening to this or watching this, what is your nervous system doing right now? What does it feel like? And notice as we move through this, whenever we talk about a subject that's maybe taps more closely to your own personal situation, what happens in your nervous system? Like just the little micro stuff. And then when you're stressed, you'll be reminded to check in, of course.
Well, I think you got to build these good habits. And so speaking of the masculine and feminine thing, and say maybe being with a woman who, let's say I'm new into a relationship, or there's a woman that I want to get into a relationship with, and she has a little more of a powerful pants in the, she's wearing the pants relationship. So say it's somebody like you, okay? Because a lot of viewers tune in because it's you. I've known you for a long time. You definitely have an aura of a stature, a power aura around you. And I think to a lot of people that could be not just a beauty standpoint, because that can be intimidating to people, but really what it is, I think, is a power status or stature that could come across as intimidating. What could you tell somebody that is going to engage with somebody like you and go interact with somebody like you that's like, do I pay for dinner? Do I not? Do I open the door? Do I not open the door? Do I hold the door? Like, what are these things? Do I comment how beautiful she looks, or is that bad? Like, the world we live in today, I'm so glad I don't have to operate in this world as a single guy, but I can't imagine the struggles, how hard they would be for somebody who's a little bit younger, who's not in a relationship, and they have somebody who is an attorney or a doctor or have a higher rank, or somebody that's very successful in their field like you.
Or a woman who is, has we'll call it a surface level confidence.
Right. How do you deal with that? Yeah, how do you deal with that as a guy?
So I think it's really important to remember that the reason that any person, but we'll talk about women in this situation, and I'll speak for myself, the reason that I have a essence or whatever, that you want to call is this stronger essence is out of fear. Like it is always, we're all scared children, right? Including any woman who says she's the most confident woman, whatever, she maybe has done a lot of her work, and so her confidence is coming from that really grounded and integral place. But I know for me, that's something I still work on all the time. I know for most of my life, I have not had what I could say, a fairly integrated personality. And so most of the places where I was acting confident, it was a mask because I was afraid of being seen for imperfect in some way, being seen for being weak. And that's why then you put on that power face. And I wanted to talk about the idea of this, I'm going to call it hyper-independent woman.
Yeah, okay.
Because in our culture, we're so striving for independence. Like, it's like looked at right now, it's just so glorified. Like, independent, be independent, don't rely on no man, like be everything you need. We are social beings from the get, right? I mean, we literally are born we're completely helpless blobs when we're born. We are dependent on our caregivers at that time. And as we grow through our life and we mature into young people, we become more able to care for ourselves little by little by little. And then as we grow into what we call adults, we're able to pretty much get along, for the most part, we're able to get along on our own without our caregivers, helping us through. And so we're no longer dependent. But we have not done the work, which in some tribes, some old cultures, some places in the world still luckily have initiation rituals, and basically that's how they teach their children to progress into a more mature state where they're no longer in that dependency mode. And that's why, that idea is how people get into codependent relationships, where you have not initiated yourself into womanhood or manhood, and you are still living at this place where you believe from a core place, a primal place, that you need the other person for your survival, which is ridiculous because you'll be okay without the other person.
Well, but like you were saying, a truly independent person, and I'll just say this one thing because I want to hear about the hyper-independent woman, because they're out there. The truly independent is impossible. Like truly, and it's impossible because the most successful people on the planet are good team members.
Exactly.
And you have to be on the team. Are you on the team? Because there's no I in team. We heard that. But I have a young
I in interdependent.
Yeah, it's like you
So that's
want to.
what we're going to discuss is
Yeah.
this idea from going from dependent and not to independent. We're too extreme at that level, and now we're living in extremes that's never any good. We want to get to what's called interdependent, and that's the between, where you understand you're a social being, you have emotional needs that have to be met somewhat, a percentage has to be met through relationship. We'll talk about emotional needs in another episode where we figure out how to meet our own, but what we can't meet on our own is the part of us that is a social being from a primal place needs to have met in a relationship. And if we can get good at understanding what percentage of what needs we need met in relationship, we are able to articulate it and ask for that from the people who we love and get it. Because that's what we want to do in relationship, is show up for the other person's needs as long as it doesn't transgress our own. So as long as it's not so overwhelming what they need from us that we become
They're right.
we're just slave at that point.
Right. And so the hyper-dependent woman.
So the hyper-dependent woman is
Because we know who you're right.
because there's a lot of
hyper-independent, right.
Hyper-independent, I'm just saying, is the person who believes she has to do it all on her own and cannot ask for help. And this actually stems from what a lot of people probably resonate with, which is the people pleaser. So the people pleaser is someone who usually gets brought up in a household where their needs were not looked at as very important. They were shushed a lot. For me personally, it was like I got told all the time, Mercedes, the world doesn't revolve around you, which is great because either that makes you a full-blown narcissist because you want to prove that it does, or it makes you it's not great, I'm saying that.
Right.
Or it makes you a people pleaser where you want to make sure that your needs you put your needs on the back burner because you want to make sure everyone else's needs are taken care of.
Or your needs are taken care of because the other people, you're only worth to yourself as a result of somebody else being happy with what you did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your worth comes from your ability to meet other people's needs, which makes you put your needs on the back burner.
Right.
And now you have not stood up for yourself.
And you're dealing with it internally. You might not even know you're dealing with it. You're paying the price.
Exactly. And so it's, this is part of the initiation process we're talking about. This is part of becoming that conscious adult, self. And
now I know a hyper independent woman.
Yes.
And what I know about her, which is interesting, and I think I know why she's doing this, but she does everything. She gets her kids ready. She's the one driving them around she's got 2 kids. She's driving them around all their teams, all their college interviews, all their exams, whatever. And she's married and she's doing everything, all of it. And I think part of it is because she has a flexible work schedule and she's able to, but I also think some of it is she's got this, she's just so worried about, maybe she's the people pleaser and maybe that's how she became in this world, because I know she's not hyper-ended. Yeah.
Worry about everything?
Yeah, no, she doesn't do that. She's kind of like, if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if that's true because I'm not with, I don't live with her, so I don't know if that's true.
Right.
But if you're assuming that's true,
right? When you
exactly, yeah, assuming that if it's true independently of what other people were doing, and it's just nobody's willing to show up, and that's the world you live in, then good for you. You're doing it, and you're pulling the rope. I mean, good. But if you're doing it because and you're training other people not to do it, where I'm not going to do it because he's going to do it anyway. I might as well not even mess with it because he or she's going to do it anyway, and they're going to redo what I did.
It's kind of, it's this sick cycle that happens. So when the hyper-independent person, the person who believes that they cannot rely on anyone else, and that's important for their worthiness, is to show, they want to show themselves, I don't need help from anyone else because that's what's going to make me feel like I'm acceptable. So when you get into that hyper-independence mode, what you're actually doing is what I would call like codependency aversion. So you're so afraid of having a dependent interaction with someone where you would essentially you could be victimized, or you could be in some sort of weak mode where you're afraid you're going to be taken advantage of in some way, or you're going to be left even.
Okay, this is really interesting that you should say that, because this is something a little more practical that as I'm thinking, because this sounds on a scale 1 to 10, and 10 is completely out there, and we're talking about like galactic consciousness. This is like creeping into a 6 and 7. But what I remember is in business, and I'm sure the people at home, and I know you've done this, especially in your work, but if you're in a job where you have to deal with other people and rely on other people to help you get the mission accomplished, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been in jobs where people might not pay you, people might not show up on time, you're sitting there ready and nobody else is ready. I mean, this is the business. I've been in businesses where with investments or like real estate or whatever, where things are just, they're not either they're being dishonest or they're being a little greedy or whatever. And what happens is when you do it or in law enforcement, you get the disgruntled cop, the old disgruntled cop. And we know from movies and TV shows who that is, and they get sarcastic and things like that. Well, it's because in all these circumstances, you deal with something enough that you start seeing everybody, any business relationship as, I don't want to say a threat, but a potential they're going to be the same as the 100 before you. Yeah, and the thing is you, and so now.
You're robbing yourself of the ability to get a need met by another individual. And this is
right.
The sickness of hyperindependence is that we're afraid to have needs. And that's the reality, is that we're actually afraid to have needs. And that means we do everything for ourselves, which leaves no room for other people in our lives to have place, and let alone lead, which is hilarious, because the hyper-independent woman, I can speak for myself on this as well, and I know so many of these women who fit in this category, what we suffer from most is wanting to be with someone who leads. Because we relax.
Oh, listen, you and I have talked about this a lot, and that's why it's funny, because when we talk about this, and somebody that I know is watching this show who's a female, she and I've had this conversation a good bit, and she's one of those people that loves planning vacations. She loves doing that, and I'm like, and it's like you and I talk about this. I'm like, I love going on vacations, or would love to go on vacations with people like you, with people like her. You know who I am. And because I don't have to do anything. And when people look at me, they'll say something like, and this is another one, you have type A, type B personalities. Oh, type A, you're chatty, you're the life of the party. Type B, you're like, I sit behind a computer and nobody look at me. People always accuse me, oh, you're type A. And I said, no, I'm actually type B. But the thing is, I'd show up and I'd just be sitting around looking around and be very nervous and weird. So I'd have to come up with an adaptable technique. And so I'd start talking, hey, John, how's it going? And then you get better at it and better. And then you become this type A. But really, all I want to do is sit with my cat and watch TV.
Yeah, so I would have you in a situation, if you came and you said, here's my issue, I want to be, type B or whatever other personality, but I seem to always fall into this category.
Yeah, right. It's like a duty or something, yeah.
And so this is, this conversation we're leading to the idea of how to lead a leader. So how to outman your woman in a sense.
Yeah.
Like if you want to be wearing the pants, or at least sharing the pants in your relationship, but you're with a hyper-independent woman, how do you lead a leader?
Yeah, how do you do that? Right, that's the question.
Yeah, so I think in this scenario, we'll just take what you're talking about.
Hold on, because most women that, at least perceptively, and we say a lot of things that are going to be very generalistic, okay? So just don't take what we're saying and be like, oh, okay. The thing is, this is generalistic, but I think most women that are on media sources that we as guys tend to look at, tend to be a little more of this hyper-independent woman. Whatever source you're looking at, they're whatever, they're really put together, they're famous, they're very successful, whatever. Part of the reason is because they're hyper-independent. So what we're talking about is you like those women. Like we as guys, we really like those women. So this is what I'm saying. So how this is very practical. So as a guy, and I see someone like Mercedes and I want to form a relationship with her, or I'm in a relationship, how do I do this? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pause and deviate from that, but this is why this is so important. How do I engage with somebody like you, knowing that you're hyper-independent?
Yes, and without power struggle,
right.
Because that's what we're trying to avoid. And that's what happens a lot of the time. Two alphas don't really ever mix, and that is also true when a man and a woman come together who are both trying to lead. So there has to be a way of communicating when to adjust into the other pole, we'll say, like the masculine pole or the feminine pole or the omega or the alpha, or however you want to put it, so that you are deciding in these situations, I'm going to be the leader and she's going to take, a supporting role, and vice versa. Because otherwise she will bulldoze through, speaking for myself, will bulldoze through and just do it myself because I know it'll get done and it'll get done well. When I have to
But you sometimes have to give the other party a chance to perform.
That's right. So how does a man do that? How does he lead a leader? And it's about reflecting in communication first and foremost. So when a woman comes and she's got all these thoughts of what she's going to do for vacation, or whichever way it is that we were talking about, where
she plans it or whatever, right?
She's coming to you with all this energy of stuff that needs to get done, and she probably has commands. She's already been in this position, and she wants she's resentful probably at this point. By the way, I'm always speaking about myself. But when I've sat in that leading for too long and taken the responsibility on my shoulder without having any of my own needs and without asking for help, I end up resentful and contemptuous of the people in my life because I'm like, why aren't they showing up the way I'm showing up? Because I'm not making space, and this is what we're getting to. So I think the best first way to intercept that is with what I would call reflecting. So it's like literally as she's discussing some with you, instead of having a power struggle of like how you want to do it your way and that's going to be the right way, and now you're butting heads, you would reflect and you would say, oh, you want to do it like this, and you would literally reflect almost identically what she has said to you and say the words, that makes sense. Because those words, or you are right about that, these are the powerful words, that makes sense.
I like that plan, yeah.
But the point is to reflect so that you've shown you hear exactly what she wants to do as a plan, and to make it not crazy and make it understandable and make it make sense by saying that makes sense. And then once you've done that, you can start intercepting with some of the ways you might want to lead, like, wow, that really makes sense. Yeah, I think that'd be a great way to do it. I also had some thoughts if you're open to hearing.
Or let me take control of this aspect of it, and I think that the delegation, because in a scenario where you have this woman who, the hyper independent, and she's planning all this stuff out or whatever it is, the man, for one, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to add into the leadership role as yourself? Are you willing to step in to some degree, or do you care? Because if you don't care and you like being in that, whatever position that is, okay, well, just beware, because that might get worse, or you might be totally happy with it. But if you are a typical guy and you want to take charge of some certain things, which I don't mean that in a negative way, but I'm just saying if you're
qualify.
Yeah, but thank you. But if you're willing to do that, then you have to also rise to that as well. So this is really basic, but like dinner, where are we going to go? What you do is you say, okay, I'm going to pick. I've got the place. You just tell me the time.
Right.
Or we're going to go on this trip, or you know what, we're going to repaint something annoying, like we're going to go a move. Anybody that's ever done a move with a significant other, moving a house or an apartment is a huge pain. Okay. But if you go in there and say, okay, I'll secure the moving van, I'll deal with the appliances, and then it's like, she's like, okay, so you're in charge of all of that.
And show up for it.
And you have, and that's the thing.
She can ask.
Yeah.
Now, there is a tricky thing in here, because when you have this hyper-independence thing, there is a shift where it actually creates a codependent relationship. It creates this where she's starting to put stuff on your plate in a resentful way. And so I would say to people listening, one of the main indicators to know when you need to go and try and start intercepting would be when you notice a passive aggressiveness or you notice that resentfulness. And the very words you want to use in that situation is there a need that's not being met here? Like, babe, is there a need that's not being met? And with that kind of calming of the storm that's building, you're now becoming that trustworthy partner that a hyper-independent woman is looking for, because you can lead from a place of you're compassionate about, what her needs are, first of all. It asks her to actually assess what her needs are, because I promise you most hyper-independent women are not doing that. They just are bulldozing, again, speaking for myself, without stopping and thinking about what she actually needs. She's already thinking about what everyone else is going to need and not herself. So to ask a hyper-independent woman almost constantly, and you have to say, babe, first, because it's, to soften.
Yeah, right,
soften.
right.
Babe, is there a need that's not being met here? If you ask that over and over, and she knows that you genuinely want to know the answer to that, and will probably help with whatever is needed there, it's like the most relieving. It puts a little work on her plate. She's got to figure out what the need is, which is important.
You're getting her to delegate.
You're getting her to become an adult.
Well, right.
And interdependence.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
Crucial.
Okay, so this is interesting. I'm really glad. This is why I love talking to you, because this whole thing was leading me on a path of one thought. And then in the end, you drew it back and you basically said, she might actually be the one having the problem. Yeah. And you're the one, as the whoever in the relationship, to rise to, okay, what can I do to help you delegate, get some stress off you, solve some of the problem? And guys, the other thing that we're really good at, guys, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but we're really good at like target fixation. Mm-hmm. So like you're, whatever fields you're in, you get fixated on a target, okay? And so in this scenario, you'd be fixated on her and how do you solve the, the move, and you're just very worried about getting the appliances secured correctly, and that's target fixation. But what you should be doing is opening up your field of view and thinking, what other things are out there that could be causing these problems? And if you're very worried about this hyper-independent woman and you're worried about one thing, what she's doing, but if you step back and alleviate this target fixation, you realize there's other things out there that are actually going on with her that aren't what you think it is. And your tactic, which is I think a really good one, it's to step into the shoes of, okay, you're gonna do this, but delegate some of this to me. How do I alleviate some of your stress? What can I do that I can do?
So I think you're walking into a potential landmine there, because first of all, hyper-independent women attract people-pleasing men.
Oh, okay.
And I would say the nice guy archetype, which people really don't like that term, but I call it the nice guy wimp, which is from David Deda's work of The Way of the Superior Man. Amazing work. The idea, though, is that we're essentially, when we come to the relationship, being the nice guy, which does not mean being kind. Kind is a totally different conversation. I'm talking about the guy who bends at every, any need you have. And so when we say, babe, what is the need that's not being met here? Or do you have a need that needs to be met here? It's not, let me cut off my arm to help you. Mm-hmm. It's figuring out, as the man in the relationship, what do I need first and foremost? What are my boundaries around those needs, which we'll talk about in another episode? And then coming to that conversation and saying, what do you need help with? When she says it's this, that, and the other, you say, okay, I can help with these things. You're giving here, right? And if you're asking this in the kind way, with saying babe at the front of it, you're allowing her to realize that she needs to take accountability for the needs that she's going to request, which means she will have to look at what's reasonable to ask you for, and she'll have to also do the assessment and figuring out what she can meet on her own, and then what's left over. But this is all a gradual coming around to consciousness about how much we're saying to ourselves in our heads as women and as men in the relationship, I shouldn't have any needs. That's not true. You just need to figure out what's the reasonable thing to ask of a partner. And in every partnership, it's going to be a little bit different. But what's the reasonable thing to ask in a partnership that does not become abusive to that person? And that only happens when two people are conscious of what their needs are. Because if I ask you for the world and you say, I've already assessed myself and I only have 25% of the world to give you, then that's reason, that's what you have. And I have to figure out if that makes sense for me. And that's kind of how it has to go back and forth, figuring out what needs can actually be, what are reasonable to each other without transgressing ourselves, and then what we can meet for each other, because we do, it's reminding each other we're on the same team. We want to get these needs met together, and we also want to go apart and figure out how to meet what we can on our own. And another statement that I would just add on the back, so if you say, babe, what need is not being met here, or is there a need not being met here that I can help with? The back end of that, because she might go into something that takes a longer conversation than is allowed in that situation. Like I know for myself, a lot of the time I go into, I passive aggressively start a conflict in the middle of a work day with a partner, and so then my partner is like, fuck, he's like checking his watch. Like I know I have all this stuff to do, and now she's going to start this, but I don't want to make her feel deprioritized. I don't want to. So the next thing you say is, when she gives you, you can say that makes sense, or whatever has to happen there so that she feels understood in this first bite that she gives you of what need might not be met there. You say, I'm committed to this relationship, and this is important to me, and I want to take time to resolve this with you. And then you set a time to come back to it. It doesn't even have to be that day. It depends on whatever your work schedule. And then you come back to it. And I think through those 3 lines we've given through this conversation, that's really going to help to hone a relationship between what's usually attracted to each other, which is this hyper-masculine or hyper-independent woman, and the nice guy personality. And as we move through our episodes in this season, Chap, we're going to talk more closely about the nice guy as well, and how to transition that nice guy archetype to assertive, to what I call conscious assertiveness, which I think is everybody should be practicing that, and I think it's what will heal relationships, solve world war.
Well, and the reoccurring theme here is, and we always have a parting kind of and the reoccurring theme here is that we've had is as a guy or anybody, you got to know yourself. You got to be confident in yourself. You got to love yourself, and you have to prioritize you'd have to understand you have feelings too. And if somebody interacting with that person understands that and makes you whole, that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when we realize that this is a team and this is an interdependent relationship, which means we can healthily move together and help each other meet each other's needs. And not only that, we can help each other heal anything that needs to be healed. We become this synergistic, unstoppable, power force. And that is, I think, what we're all after. But we've been sold this Disney idea that really gets us into this codependent thing.
Yeah.
And it's not well, So anyways.
So it's go team.
It's go team all the way. Just figuring yourself out before you.
Well, you got to be good before you get on the team.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there you go. Yeah. You got to practice.
Okay, so as usual, subscribe, comment, connect with us, and God, we're having so much fun on this show. I feel like this season's gonna.
Maybe we should do another show. Should we do another episode?
Probably do a few more.
Yeah, a couple more episodes. Okay.
And I just want to remind you guys that from the bottom of my heart, this is going to be the thing that I'm going to repeat over and over. But all the work that we're going to be talking about and that we have been talking about on this show is about remembering your wholeness, remembering, you're just understanding that this is something that you already are.